In going green, new satellite data revealed that the world's largest air pollution hotspot is right here in South Africa in the Mpumalanga province. Well, according to groundbreaking analysis by Greenpeace, data points to coal and transport as the two principal sources of air pollution, with Mpumalanga topping the charts as the world's largest NO2 emission hotspot across 6 continents. For more on this and its possible impact on electricity supply in South Africa, we're joined by Melita Steele, Greenpeace Africa's senior climate and energy campaign manager. Very good evening to you. Thank you very much for your time. So this is unbelievable news that according to this data, Mpumalanga is one of the closely air polluting spots, comparing it to countries like China. Take us through the data report.
Yeah, so it's a pretty shocking statistic when you come through it, because you look at all the other countries and you think, how can South Africa actually be top of the list? Yeah. The reality is that it's because we have 12 coal-fired power stations in Mpumalanga that are all owned and operated by Eskom. They're very close to each other, so they're within a 25-kilometer radius, and they're also very old, so they're highly polluting. Our minimum emission standards are much weaker than countries like China and Japan, and Eskom doesn't comply with those minimum emission standards. And so what that means is the pollution coming from the coal-fired power stations creates this hotspot.
Now, with this data that we've managed to compile that was done via satellite, have you communicated this to Eskom?
Yes, absolutely.
What is their response?
Well, we've had a little bit of backwards and forwards on Twitter with Eskom's spokesperson, and he is basically saying, I think Eskom is under quite a lot of pressure at the moment, not only because of this, but this is definitely adding to it. Eskom's position thus far is that they're doing everything they can around air pollution, and that if they were to comply, A, they can't afford it, and B, they don't believe that the benefits outweigh the costs, and C, they're basically holding South Africa hostage by saying coal-fired power stations would have to close down and then there would be blackouts. Greenpeace disagrees with that, in that coal-fired power stations would have to be closed down. But in fact, if we invest in renewable energy really, really aggressively, then that capacity can be replaced with renewable energy instead.
But in terms of resources, in terms of funding, is that something that is viable in the short term?
So, renewable energy is the cheapest source of electricity in South Africa. Every other source is more expensive, and South Africa can become a leader, and renewable energy would allow us to actually strive for clean air for all. But what it requires is political will, and the investment and backing it. Greenpeace believes that if Eskom can't comply with these minimum emission standards, there are massive impacts on people's health, and the coal-fired power stations should be closed and renewable energy should be built in its place.
Now, take us through your relationship or your liaison with government in calling for, come 2018, that some of the power plants should be cut in half. There should be no new power plants for the IRP 2018. What has your correspondence been from government, and what has their response been?
Well, Greenpeace has engaged for many years with Eskom around the air quality, the problems around air quality and what we would like to see them do. We're also engaging very heavily in the integrated resource plan process. And what you're referring to is what Greenpeace is calling for, is that we should be halving our coal capacity by 2030. And that's actually in line with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report, special report on 1.5 degrees, where they say if we don't actually reduce our coal capacity by 2030, we'll be heading towards catastrophic climate change. And burning coal is one of the major drivers.
Earlier on you were mentioning that it's highly polluted, that there's over 12 coal plant stations next to each other in the province, and that's been contributing to high pollution in the air. Let's just take us through some of the health concerns, if any, that you've also raised.
So nitrogen dioxide is a dangerous pollutant in and of itself. It damages people's respiratory system, so we're talking about being susceptible to things like flu, bronchitis, coughing. in the longer term, it can cause chronic diseases like lung disease, lung cancer, and even heart disease. And what's even worse about the satellite data is that it shows that the air pollution is blown across into Johannesburg and Pretoria for periods of time in the year, which means that the millions of people living in Gauteng are also affected by this pollution.
Yeah, definitely. Well, as much as it's something that you've posed to Eskom, I suppose community members, residents, citizens of South Africa who would also be concerned about this, what sort of interaction or what sort of play do they have in this?
I think more and more we're realizing that air pollution is a public health crisis, and so the Department of Environmental Affairs, the Department of Health, they need to step up. And increasingly what we need to see is that people are standing up and saying, this affects me, this affects my children, my children's children, and you have to do better. So that means supporting organizations who are calling for cleaner air. That's organizations like Greenpeace, Groundwork, EarthLife Africa, Center for Environmental Rights. You can go to the Greenpeace website to find out more, but essentially it means that people can no longer sit back and think that something will be done. We can only create change if we demand change together.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen that type of participation? You mentioned you were going through a back and forth with Eskom. Have you seen that support group on social media platforms?
Well, I'll take you back to 2014, which was when we last worked on Eskom's application to postpone compliance with the minimum emission standards. At that stage, we got a petition signed, which went to the National Air Quality Officer, of 25,000 people who signed that petition. And that's because people can see the impacts of air pollution on their health. And we're hoping that because Eskom is now applying for a second round of postponements, that the groundswell will be even bigger. I mean, we're #1 in the world. This can't continue.
So just take us through some of the regulations that you say Eskom, I suppose, or South Africa is not complying with, and how different are they in contrast with the other competing countries, rather, across the 6 continents that were included in the survey?
So the minimum emission standards are part of the national air quality legislation. They came into place in 2015 and they become stricter in 2020. So that is what Eskom is not complying with. The minimum emission standards are basically the levels of pollution that polluters can actually reach. If they go above that, then they're not complying. So Eskom is applying for postponements, and originally they said from compliance, and originally they said there's no way they can comply. If you compare what we have to other countries, we're well below what the World Health Organization recommends. And just in terms of nitrogen dioxide, the minimum emission standards allow 10 times more nitrogen dioxide than countries like China and Japan. So our standards are weak, and there's a lack of compliance.
What does the WHO recommend?
Well, I can't remember their standards offhand, but I know that South African standards are definitely weaker than theirs.
Well below, yeah, definitely. And what else is Greenpeace going to be doing with this information going forward, now that we've seen it come forward?
Well, we're advocating for Eskom to comply, or to close their coal-fired power stations. We're also working really hard on the integrated resource plan and trying to make sure that new coal does not go into that plan. And we're calling on an action plan. So we're going to continue to work on the air pollution problem in Mpumalanga and really try to push for the just but urgent transition away from coal and towards renewable energy.
So what sort of avenues are you looking with regards to the integrated resource plan?
Well, so the integrated resource plan is the country's electricity plan, and it's currently being finalized. Well, that's hopeful. The country's electricity plan was last published in 2011. It's supposed to be revised every 2 years, but it hasn't been revised since 2011. The new energy minister has said that he will actually finalize it, and so the public participation process just finished on Friday last week. And so we're waiting to see what the final IRP will look like. But we have said that if it is an irrational plan that includes new nuclear, then it opens itself to a legal challenge because it conflicts with our constitutional right to a healthy environment.
Thank you very much for your time this evening. We'll leave it there. Melita Steele, a Senior Climate and Energy Campaign Manager for Greenpeace Africa, just taking us through how Mpumalanga has been named the largest hotspot air polluter over 6 continents right there in Mpumalanga with regards to all those coal plant-based power stations run by Eskom, just taking us through their contribution there. And of course, what they're calling on government to come and comply as well as reduce its emissions. Of course, you can send us your comments and make sure you include that hashtag #FullView. You can also send us your voice notes. You can also send us your video calls or +2 766 479 8056. If you'd like to see any of the features that you've seen here on the Full View as well as the interviews, you can do so by going on to sabcnews.com. You can also find us on Facebook as well as Twitter.